My grandfather always told me that family is more than blood. Looking back, I never fully understood what he meant until that moment on the porch. The solid weight of the legal folder in my hand matched the heaviness in my chest as I watched my brother Jake and my mother pull up with a moving truck. The $900,000 estate my grandparents left me had become a battleground, but they had no idea what was coming. Their smug faces said it all. They thought they had won. If only they knew how prepared I was for this fight. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from. In the comments, hit that like button and subscribe to see more stories about standing up for yourself when family tries to take advantage. Growing up, my grandparents' house was my sanctuary. Every Sunday, without fail, I would count the minutes until we pulled into their driveway. The smell of my grandmother's pot roast would waft through the screen door as my grandfather would wave from his workshop, setting down whatever project he was tinkering with, to give me a bear hug. During summer breaks, my parents would drop me off for weeks at a time, which were the happiest days of my childhood. My grandfather, a retired carpenter, took me under his wing when I was just 10 years old. "Hugo, a man needs to know how to work with his hands," he would say patiently, teaching me how to measure twice and cut once. We restored an old dresser together, fixed the creaky steps on the back porch, and built a treehouse that still stands in the massive oak in their backyard. Those hours in his workshop smelling sawdust and hearing stories about his own father shaped who I am today. My grandmother was equally influential. She pulled a chair to the counter so I could help knead bread dough and taught me family recipes that dated back generations. "Food brings people together," she would say, showing me how to fold pierogi dough just right. In the evenings, she would bring out photo albums telling me stories about relatives I never met and places I had never been. Through her stories, I gained a sense of belonging to something larger than myself. Our family home was often filled with tension. Dad worked long hours at the factory and came home exhausted. Mom was perpetually dissatisfied with everything. But at my grandparents' house, there was peace. Their modest 3-bedroom ranch held more love than our newer, larger home ever did. My brother Jake could not have been more different in his relationship with our grandparents. 3 years older than me, he found every excuse to avoid Sunday dinners. "They are so boring," he would complain. "Why do we have to go to that old people's house again?" When forced to attend, he would bring his Game Boy, barely looking up, to acknowledge our grandparents' attempts at conversation. During holiday gatherings, Jake would arrive late and leave early, spending the minimal amount of time required before making up some excuse about meeting friends. I remember one Christmas when Grandma had knitted us both sweaters. I wore mine proudly, while Jake rolled his eyes and stuffed his in the back of the closet, never to be worn. "Look at you, Grandma's boy," Jake would taunt whenever I talked about spending time with them. When I was 16, I mentioned helping Grandpa re-roof the shed, and Jake laughed. "Old people smell, and their house is stuck in the 1970s. You are such a loser for hanging out with them." One incident stands out particularly clearly. When our grandfather turned 80, I organized a surprise party and invited the whole family. Jake showed up an hour late, stayed for 20 minutes, and spent most of that time on his phone. Before leaving, he loudly asked our mother when the old man would finally kick the bucket, thinking no one else could hear. The hurt in my grandfather's eyes haunts me to this day. Our family dynamics were complicated by our mother's clear favoritism. Jake could do no wrong in her eyes. When he crashed his first car, she bought him a newer one. When he dropped out of community college, she defended his need to find himself. Meanwhile, my academic achievements and steady work ethic were taken for granted, expected rather than celebrated. Our father was physically present, but emotionally distant, working overtime to keep up with the family's expenses. He rarely intervened in conflicts, preferring to retreat to his garage or take extra shifts rather than face the tension at home. Despite financial struggles that had my parents arguing about bills, My mother never said no to Jake. Designer clothes, the latest electronics, expensive trips with friends. Somehow there was always money for him. Meanwhile, I worked weekends at the local hardware store through high school, paid my own cell phone bill, and took out student loans for college. Jake got a brand new car for his 18th birthday. I inherited my father's 12-year-old sedan when I turned 18 and was expected to cover the insurance. These disparities were never acknowledged, just accepted as the natural order in our household. As my grandparents entered their 80s, their health began to decline. Grandpa's arthritis made woodworking difficult, and Grandma's memory started slipping. Without hesitation, I transferred to a college closer to their home and rearranged my class schedule to help care for them. 3 times a week, I would drive them to various medical appointments, sitting patiently in waiting rooms and taking detailed notes about medications and treatments. I installed grab bars in their bathroom, moved essential items to lower shelves, and took over the yard work. Every weekend, I would stock their refrigerator with prepared meals and help with housekeeping they could no longer manage. During this time, our bond grew even deeper. Between appointments, we would stop for ice cream or take scenic drives. Grandpa would point out buildings he had worked on in his youth, and Grandma would squeeze my hand in silent gratitude. These small moments meant everything to me. Jake called maybe twice a year, usually around his birthday, or when he needed money. My mother checked in occasionally, but always had some excuse why she could not visit or help. "I have my own life, Hugo," she would say, when I suggested she visit. "Not everyone can spend all their time with old people like you do." The last year of my grandparents' lives was difficult but precious. Grandpa's health deteriorated rapidly after a fall, and Grandma was diagnosed with late-stage cancer shortly after. I spent as much time as possible at their house, balancing classes, a part-time job, and caregiving. During one of our last conversations, Grandpa called me to his bedside. "Hugo, family is more than blood," he said, his voice weaker, but his eyes clear and determined. "It is about who shows up. Remember that, and protect what matters." At the time, I thought he was speaking philosophically, but later I would understand the practical implications of his words. Grandma expressed similar sentiments in her final weeks. "There will be conflicts after we are gone," she warned. "Stay true to yourself and what you know is right." She passed away peacefully in her sleep, and Grandpa followed 3 months later as if he had been waiting to join her. At both funerals, I was overwhelmed with genuine grief. Jake and my mother performed appropriate sadness for the assembled family and friends, but I noticed them checking their phones during the services and discussing vacation plans at the reception. Their mourning felt like another performance in a lifetime of conditional love. The reading of the will was scheduled for 2 weeks after my grandfather's funeral. I arrived early at the lawyer's office, still processing my grief and not thinking much about potential inheritances. My grandparents had lived modestly, and I assumed any assets would be divided equally between my brother and me, perhaps with some small personal items specifically designated. Mr. Walters, my grandparents' attorney of 30 years, greeted me warmly before Jake and my mother arrived. When we were all seated in the conference room, he cleared his throat and began reading. The shock on their faces mirrored my own when he announced that I was the sole inheritor of the house and the entirety of their estate valued at approximately $900,000. "This cannot be right," my mother interrupted, her voice shrill. "There must be a mistake." "There is no mistake, Mrs. Carter," Mr. Walters replied calmly. "Your parents were very clear about their wishes. They made this decision with sound mind and complete understanding of their actions." Jake slammed his fist on the table. "This is bull. Hugo obviously manipulated them when they were old and confused. We will contest this." I sat in stunned silence, feeling a complex mix of gratitude for my grandparents' generosity and guilt at being the sole beneficiary. I had never expected this, and certainly had never asked for it. As we left the office, Jake grabbed my arm roughly. "You think you are so smart. This is not over. That money should be split fairly. You will regret this." My mother stood beside him, arms crossed, nodding in agreement. The harassment began immediately. My phone would ring multiple times daily, with either Jake or my mother demanding I do the right thing and split the inheritance. Their definition of right, of course, meant giving them what they wanted, despite years of neglecting the very people whose money they now felt entitled to. "You always were a selfish little brat," my mother spat during one call. "After everything we have done for you," Jake took a different approach, alternating between threats and attempts at manipulation. "Think about what people will say when they hear how you took advantage of Grandma and Grandpa," he warned. Then, in the next breath, "Come on, little brother. We are family. You know they would want us to share." The situation escalated when Jake began spreading rumors throughout our extended family. According to him, I had isolated our grandparents in their final years, poisoned them against the rest of the family, and coerced them into changing their will. Some relatives called to express concern or outright condemnation without ever asking for my side of the story. Social media became another battlefield. Jake posted vague statements about elder abuse and toxic family members that were clearly directed at me, though he never named me explicitly. Distant cousins and family friends commented with support for him, unaware of the truth. Unannounced visits became increasingly common and threatening. Jake would show up at the house, demanding to be let in, because it is my grandparents' house too. My mother accompanied him on several occasions, standing in the driveway, yelling about family loyalty and my betrayal. As the hostility increased, so did my anxiety. I began having trouble sleeping, jumping at every noise, and constantly checking the locks. This house, that had always been my safe haven, now felt like a fortress under siege. I scheduled a meeting with a financial advisor to discuss the inheritance and how best to honor my grandparents' legacy. During our conversation, he recommended I speak with an estate attorney given the hostile family situation. Family inheritance disputes can get ugly, he warned. You need to protect yourself. The estate attorney helped me understand the legal aspects of my situation and suggested gathering documentation of my grandparents' mental state and our relationship. During this process, I discovered something disturbing. Jake had substantial gambling debts. A mutual friend who worked at a casino mentioned seeing Jake lose thousands of dollars multiple times in recent months. This discovery led me to dig deeper. I found letters in my grandfather's desk from Jake requesting loans that were substantial and frequent. I also uncovered a notebook where my grandfather had documented these requests and his concerns about Jake's financial habits. One entry read, "Declined $5,000 to Jake today. Claims for car repairs, but Emily mentioned seeing him at casino again. Worried about him, but cannot enable this behavior." My grandmother had apparently shared these concerns. In her personal journal, she wrote, "Jake visited today for the first time in months. Within an hour, he asked for money again. When we refused, he became angry and left without finishing lunch. Hugo calls just to check on us. Jake only calls when he needs something." With this information and growing concern about Jake's intentions, I installed security cameras around the property and began documenting every interaction with my brother and mother. The attorney advised me to communicate with them only in writing when possible to maintain a record of all exchanges. My caution proved warranted when I discovered a piece of mail that had been delivered to my address but opened before I received it. It was a notice about a court filing fee. Jake had initiated legal proceedings to contest the will based on claims of undue influence. According to his filing, I had manipulated our grandparents, and they had verbally promised him half of everything. Further investigation revealed he had found an early draft of their will from nearly a decade ago that divided the estate equally between us. He was presenting this as evidence of their true intentions before my supposed manipulation. My mother had signed an affidavit supporting his claims, stating she had heard our grandmother express regret about the final will arrangement. These discoveries sent me into a panic. Though I knew their claims were false, I also knew how messy and protracted legal battles could be. I could potentially lose everything my grandparents wanted me to have while draining the inheritance on legal fees. During a sleepless night, I remembered my grandfather's words about protecting what matters. The next morning, I called his attorney and asked a crucial question: did my grandfather ever discuss setting up a trust for the property and assets? The attorney's answer changed everything. Not only had my grandfather discussed this option, but he had also started the paperwork before his final illness. With the attorney's guidance, I completed the process of creating an irrevocable trust for the property and most of the financial assets. This legal structure would protect the inheritance from claims and ensure it was used according to my grandparents' wishes. Throughout this process, I maintained a calm facade whenever I encountered Jake or my mother. I neither confirmed nor denied any knowledge of their legal maneuvers. I simply continued living in the house, caring for it, as my grandparents would have wanted, while quietly securing everything they had entrusted to me. The ambush came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in the garden, tending to my grandmother's beloved roses, when a car screeched into the driveway. Jake emerged from the driver's side, my mother from the passenger seat, both wearing expressions of triumph. Jake waved a folder of papers as they strode toward me. "Got some news for you, little brother," Jake announced, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "Better start packing." My mother stood beside him, arms crossed. "We tried to be reasonable, Hugo. You forced our hand." Jake thrust the papers toward me. "Court date is set. Judge Harriman is an old friend of Dad's golf buddy. The house will be in my name by next week, and you will be out by Friday." He laughed, a cold sound that echoed in the quiet neighborhood. "Maybe you can crash on a friend's couch. Oh, wait, you do not have any friends." "This is what your grandparents would have wanted," my mother added, her voice sickeningly sweet. "They would be heartbroken to see how you have tried to cheat your own brother." Before I could respond, Jake pulled out his phone and started taking pictures of the house. "Just documenting my property. I am thinking of knocking out this wall, modernizing the whole place, or maybe just selling it to developers. This lot could fit 3 new houses with the right zoning." The casual disregard for my grandparents' beloved home struck deeper than any personal insult could have. I remained silent, knowing anything I said would only fuel their cruelty. "We will be back Friday morning," with movers, Jake called over his shoulder as they returned to the car. "Do yourself a favor and be gone before we get here. Save yourself the embarrassment." As their car disappeared down the street, the panic attack hit me full force. My chest tightened, and I could not catch my breath. I stumbled inside and collapsed on the kitchen floor, the same floor where I had helped my grandmother bake cookies and where my grandfather had taught me how to patch tile. In that moment of distress, memories flooded back. My grandfather's voice seemed to echo in the room. "Protect what matters." My grandmother's gentle reminder, "Stay true to what you know is right." I thought of all the weekends spent caring for them, the countless small acts of love that formed our bond, and the trust they had placed in me. With shaking hands, I called my attorney. Her reassurance was immediate and absolute. "The trust is ironclad, Hugo. The documents they have are meaningless. They cannot touch the house or any assets in the trust. Let them come on Friday. We will be ready." The next 48 hours were a blur of preparation. I gathered every relevant document, organized chronologically in a professional portfolio. I contacted several of my grandparents' friends who had witnessed their deteriorating relationship with Jake and my mother over the years. They agreed to provide written statements about my caregiving role and Jake's absence. I secured the most precious family heirlooms and personal items in a safe location, not putting it past Jake to steal them out of spite. Small items with tremendous sentimental value: my grandmother's recipe box, my grandfather's first woodworking tools, the family Bible, with generations of names recorded inside, were too important to risk losing. My attorney confirmed our legal standing one final time. The trust was established properly and cannot be contested under these circumstances, she assured me. You have documentation of your grandparents' mental competence at the time of the will and trust creation. You have witnesses to their wishes. You have evidence of your consistent care and Jake's absence. Stay calm, present the facts, and let the law work as it should. I set up discrete recording devices around the front porch and entry hall, with clear signs indicating recording was in progress to maintain legality. I notified the local police of potential disturbance, not requesting immediate presence, but ensuring they were aware of the situation should things escalate. The final piece of preparation was mental. I spent Thursday evening sitting in my grandfather's favorite chair, drawing strength from memories of his unwavering integrity. Stand tall, speak truth, and those who matter will listen, he always said. I would need that strength tomorrow. Friday morning dawned clear and bright. I showered, dressed in a crisp button-down shirt and slacks, and prepared a pot of coffee. At precisely 9 a.m., I took my position on the front porch, settled into a rocking chair, with the portfolio of documents on my lap, and waited. They arrived with the subtlety of a circus parade. A large moving truck, followed by Jake's luxury SUV that he could not afford, pulled into the driveway. 4 burly movers emerged from the truck, while Jake and my mother exited their vehicle, all smiles and confidence. Their expressions faltered momentarily when they saw me sitting calmly on the porch, but Jake quickly recovered. Still here, I thought you would have slunk away by now. No matter, it will just be more embarrassing this way. The movers looked uncomfortable, sensing the tension. Jake waved them forward. Start with the living room furniture. Anything personal can go in the trash. I stood slowly, portfolio in hand. Before you take one step onto this property, there is something you should know. Jake rolled his eyes dramatically. Save the speech, Hugo. We have legal papers. He waved the folder again like a magician showing off a trick. Interesting papers, I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. May I see them? Surprised by my calm, Jake handed them over. I made a show of reading them carefully before looking up. These are quite impressive. There is just one small problem. I opened my own portfolio and removed the trust documents holding them out. The house and all assets belonging to our grandparents were placed in an irrevocable trust 3 months ago. I am the trustee. This property legally cannot be transferred, sold, or taken through the type of claim you have filed. The color drained from Jake's face. You are lying. The documentation is all here, including Grandpa's initial paperwork that predates his death. This was his plan all along. I turned to the movers. Gentlemen, I apologize for the confusion, but there will be no move today. This property is legally protected by a trust, and these individuals have no claim to it. My mother stepped forward, switching tactics instantly. Hugo, sweetie, we are still your family. Surely we can work something out. Your brother has been going through a rough time, and this inheritance would really help him get back on his feet. You really think I would let that happen? I asked quietly. After years of you both ignoring and disrespecting our grandparents, after Jake barely visited them, even when they were dying, after you spread lies about me and tried to steal what they explicitly wanted me to have, Jake's rage erupted. He lunged forward, attempting to push past me into the house. This is my grandparents' house, too. You cannot keep me out. I stood my ground. Actually, I can. This is private property, and you are not welcome here. The recording devices around the porch and entryway have captured your stated intent to remove property that does not belong to you. That constitutes attempted theft. My mother's face contorted between anger and desperate pleading. You would do this to your own mother, after everything I have done for you. What exactly have you done, Mom? You chose Jake over me my entire life. You chose your own comfort over helping your parents in their final years. Now you are choosing greed over respecting their wishes. Jake made another attempt to enter the house, shoving me hard enough that I stumbled against the railing. At that moment, a police cruiser pulled into the driveway. Mrs. Abernathy, my grandparents' neighbor of 30 years, had been watching from her window and called them when she saw the confrontation turning physical. "Is there a problem here?" the officer asked, approaching the porch. Jake immediately adopted a victim stance. "This is a family matter, officer. My brother is trying to steal our grandparents' property." I calmly presented both sets of documents, their court filing, and my trust paperwork. "I am the legal trustee of this property, officer. These individuals have been informed they are not welcome here and have attempted to force entry after making explicit threats." After reviewing the documents and speaking separately with all parties, the officer made the situation clear. "Sir," he addressed Jake, "the trust documentation appears valid. This is legally not your property to enter or remove items from. I suggest you consult with your attorney about the trust, but for now, you need to leave the premises." Jake's face contorted with rage. "This is not over," he hissed, as the officer escorted him and my mother back to their vehicle. "I will fight this all the way. Any further attempts to enter the property without permission will result in trespassing charges," the officer warned, before returning to inform me that they would increase patrols in the area for the next few days. As the moving truck and SUV pulled away, I collapsed onto the porch steps, shaking with adrenaline and relief. The battle was won, but the war with my family had reached a breaking point from which there might be no return. The weeks following the confrontation were strangely quiet. The absence of harassment calls and surprise visits should have been a relief, but instead I found myself isolated with conflicting emotions. Victory felt hollow when it came at the expense of family relationships, however toxic they might have been. The house seemed emptier than ever. I wandered from room to room surrounded by memories, but struggling with doubts. Had I done the right thing? Would my grandparents have wanted such a complete family rupture despite their clear wishes about the inheritance? After 2 weeks of this emotional limbo, I finally reached out to a therapist. Dr. Marshall specialized in family trauma and inheritance conflicts, and from our first session, she validated feelings I had suppressed for years. "What you are experiencing is complicated grief," she explained. "You are mourning not only your grandparents, but also the family relationships you wished you had. The inheritance simply brought long-standing dynamics to a breaking point. Through weekly sessions, I began to process the tangled web of family history. I recognized patterns of favoritism that predated my birth, learned to separate genuine guilt from manipulated guilt, and gradually released the responsibility I had carried for relationships that had never been my failure." As my emotional health improved, I reached out to extended family members who had been fed Jake's version of events. My Aunt Susan, my mother's sister, who had always kept her distance from family drama, visited for coffee. After seeing the documentation and hearing my side of the story, she offered unexpected support. "Your mother has always enabled Jake's worst tendencies," she acknowledged. "I love my sister, but she made her choice long ago. Your grandparents knew exactly what they were doing when they left everything to you." Reconnecting with supportive family members helped heal some of the isolation. My grandfather's brother, Thomas, began calling weekly, sharing stories about their childhood that gave me new insights into my grandfather's values. My grandmother's cousin Eleanor sent family recipes that had not been included in the ones I already had, along with notes about their origin. With renewed emotional energy, I turned to the house itself. Rather than selling it as many suggested, I decided to honor my grandparents by making it truly mine while preserving their legacy. I restored my grandfather's workshop, organized his tools, and began small woodworking projects using his techniques. I planted new roses alongside my grandmother's established bushes and used her recipes to host small dinner gatherings with new friends. These renovations were not just physical, but spiritual, transforming spaces of grief into places of new beginnings. The master bedroom, which I had initially avoided, became my own after repainting and rearranging, keeping select photographs and mementos while making the space reflect my personality. The estrangement from my immediate family continued, though, in evolving forms. 3 months after the confrontation, my mother called with a tearful, if somewhat half-hearted apology. I might not have always been fair, she admitted carefully, avoiding any specific acknowledgement of her actions. Family should find a way to move forward. Our relationship remained distant but civil. We spoke occasionally on holidays, keeping conversations superficial. She never directly mentioned the inheritance again, though subtle digs about some people having all the luck would sometimes slip into her comments. Jake took longer to admit defeat. His attorney eventually explained the futility of fighting the trust, but Jake found other ways to express his resentment. He would drive by the house, occasionally honking his horn or revving his engine late at night. These childish acts of defiance gradually decreased as months passed. Through mutual acquaintances, I learned the extent of Jake's financial troubles. His gambling had escalated to the point where he had lost his apartment and was temporarily living with a friend. The inheritance he had counted on to solve his problems had never been the answer he needed. Extended family eventually learned the full story through a combination of legal proceedings becoming public record and my quiet but consistent sharing of documentation when asked directly. The narrative shifted from suspicion of me to recognition of the complex family dynamics that had led to this point. Setting boundaries proved to be the most difficult but rewarding part of my healing journey. I learned to say no without guilt, to recognize manipulation tactics immediately, and to surround myself with people who valued me for who I was rather than what I could provide. My career benefited from this new confidence. I returned to complete my master's degree, using a small portion of the inheritance for tuition while investing the bulk as my grandparents would have wanted. My professor connected me with a firm that valued my combination of technical knowledge and practical experience, leading to a position with growth, potential, and purpose. The community I built around me became the family I chose. Neighbors who had known my grandparents invited me for holidays. Colleagues became friends who understood my values and supported my goals. I even began dating Morgan, a landscape architect who appreciated the history of my grandmother's garden and helped me maintain its beauty while adding contemporary elements. What I came to understand was that my inheritance went far beyond the monetary value or the physical property. My grandparents had given me a foundation of values that money could not buy: integrity, perseverance, generosity, and the courage to stand up for what is right, even when it is difficult. The security of the house and financial assets provided freedom, but not the kind Jake would have used it for. Instead, it gave me freedom from fear, freedom to make choices based on principle rather than necessity, and freedom to continue my grandparents' legacy of helping others. I established a small scholarship at the local community college for students studying trades, honoring my grandfather's belief in the value of skilled craftsmanship. I volunteered at the senior center where my grandmother had once taught knitting classes, recognizing the importance of community for older adults. When I look back at that day on the porch portfolio in hand, I no longer see it as just a confrontation over property. It was a moment of claiming my own worth, of honoring promises to people who had shown me unconditional love, and of breaking generational patterns of manipulation and favoritism. Family is indeed more than blood. It is found in the people who show up consistently, who support your growth rather than use you for their benefit, who love you without conditions or comparisons. Sometimes, protecting what matters means making difficult choices that others may never understand or forgive. The peace I have found in this understanding is my true inheritance. The house provides shelter, the money provides opportunities, but the wisdom my grandparents imparted gives me the discernment to use both with purpose and integrity. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who tried to take advantage of you? What did that experience teach you about your own strength? Share your story in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories about navigating complex family dynamics and finding your own path. Thank you for listening, and remember that sometimes the family we choose is as important as the family we are born into.